When examining or discussing certain battles, movements, and ideologies which have led to the conquering of nations and the deaths of millions, they can often be boiled down to a certain group or person whose mission was to change the course of our planet. The likes of Adolf Hitler, Saddam Hussein, Joseph Stalin, and Osama bin Laden are just some of the names that pop up when discussing war, terrorism, and dictatorships. In today's episode, we will focus on someone whose name is not immediately recognized, but whose actions spoke volumes. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was a Jordanian militant jihadist who oversaw training facilities in Afghanistan and became associated with a number of bombings and beheadings during the war in Iraq, and was nicknamed the Sheikh of the Slaughterers by his followers. Zarqawi assembled the Jamaat al-Tawhid wal Jihad in 1999 and led it until his death in June 2006. His name would continuously appear in videos and audio tapes where he gloated about his involvement in executions, suicide bombings, and other acts of violence amongst those he deemed an enemy of the Jihad. He joined Al-Qaeda in 2004 and pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden, conducting a barrage of bombings on Shiite Muslims in Iraq just a year later, as well as attacking the barracks of US military personnel and large concentrations of Shia militias. He is also believed to have been the mastermind behind the 2005 bombing of 3 hotels in the capital city of his home country of Jordan. So, just who was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and what led him to be one of the most recognizable faces of both terror and jihad? What were his motives and influence among those in the Middle East? And what steps were taken to eventually eliminate his threat? Today, we will look into the eyes of terror. Welcome to Wars of the World. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, born Ahmed Fadil Nazal al-Khalayla, was born in 1966 into poverty in the semi-arid country of Jordan. His family were of Palestinian descent, and he is thought to have grown up in the populous city of Zarqa with his 7 sisters and 2 brothers. His father's identity is not fully known, but many believe he was a retired army officer, and even less is known about his mother. Growing up in poverty, al-Zarqawi quickly became involved in gang fights, heavy drinking, and petty crime, and became associated with extremist ideologies and viewpoints. His first wife, Mohammed, also from Jordan, gave birth to their 4 children and was opposed to his militant perspective. His second wife, Isra, was 14 years old when he married her, and gave birth to a child when she was just 15. Both mother and child would later be killed alongside Zarqawi. His third wife was an Iraqi, who is also believed to have died during the airstrike that killed al-Zarqawi. So, what is it that makes this particular radical extremist so prominent amongst his fellow ideologists? Al-Zarqawi was involved in numerous attacks, suicide bombings, extreme propaganda, and barbaric beheadings, many of which we are aware of, and most likely there are many more that have either been classified or assumed to have happened due to his unrelenting penchant for violence. It would take many hours to dissect each and every act of brutality, so let's focus on what many associate his rise to power being linked to. ISIS, or the Islamic State, is a major terrorist group that operates in virtually every part of the world. Their global reach amongst the youth via social media, the dark web, and other brainwashing tactics have led many to pledge allegiance to their cause and partake in multiple acts of terrorism in the name of their organization. Though the group is still relatively new with regards to worldwide terror groups, ISIS have certainly made their impact across the globe and continue to recruit, operate, and purport their propaganda in the hopes of a worldwide caliphate. And yet, much like the Nazis in Germany during World War II, it all began with one man, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. In 1993, when he was just 23 years old, al-Zarqawi spent a lot of time in Afghanistan before returning to his homeland of Jordan, where he was arrested and sent to prison for subverting the government and possessing illegal weapons. During the time he spent in the correctional facility, al-Zarqawi refused to turn his life around. Instead, he used the time to learn the teachings of the Quran and to manipulate its message to recruit fellow inmates, encouraging them to assist with a potential Islamic jihad. A royal amnesty in 1999 freed Zarqawi and allowed him to return to Afghanistan to meet with one of the most radical terrorists of all time, Osama bin Laden. Interestingly, it's noted that the two egotistical fanatics did not take a liking to each other during their initial meetings. According to retired former director of the United States Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, Zarqawi was incredibly brutal and described him as Hitler-like, thus stressing the importance of his influence amongst many disillusioned young men. In an interview conducted by CNN for their Declassified series, the former National Security Advisor for the Trump administration stated that, quote, "He was a dictator with a plan. His plan was to kill as many people that did not see life the way he saw it, and to change the face and the nature of the Middle East, and frankly, the Islamic world." End quote. After the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, orchestrated by Osama bin Laden and his henchmen, al-Zarqawi made his way to Iraq, and by 2003 was at the forefront of a ferocious 3-year campaign offensive of coordinated attacks within the country, as well as US targets. He called his group Al-Qaeda in Iraq. As time went on, Zarqawi continued to use his connections and charisma to recruit, brainwash, and deploy many of his followers to their deaths, either on the battlefield or by way of suicide, in order to bring about his vision of a global caliphate and Islamic state. Mike Flynn commented on the rapid, widespread influence that the extremist had among the Islamic community. He states, quote, "When I look at what we're facing now, I see Zarqawi all over this battlefield. Zarqawi is the father of the Islamic State." End quote. Fellow US Army General Stanley McChrystal commented on his cult-like status by acknowledging that, quote, "He created something bigger than a small terrorist organization. He created a movement." End quote. The acceleration of ISIS via the warped teachings of al-Zarqawi and his propagandist ideologies meant that he was not just a terrorist soldier, but a powerful, manipulative mastermind who was fast becoming a monumental threat to both national and international security. As mentioned earlier, the initial meetings between al-Zarqawi and the face of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, did not go as planned. Both fanatics took an instant dislike to one another. Bin Laden was said to have disagreed entirely with Zarqawi's agenda and coordinated attacks on fellow Muslims. McChrystal comments on the powerful perspective laid out by Zarqawi, which led to the disagreement between the two. He states, quote, "What he was trying to do was create a civil war between Sunni and Shia." End quote. Thus creating major complications, security issues, and setbacks with regards to the US-led military coalition. Despite their purported message of unifying Muslims into a worldwide caliphate and Islamic state, to this day, ISIS continues to target Muslims who don't follow its interpretation of the faith. One of these atrocities was carried out on the 25th of March 2016, when a suicide bomber blew himself up in a crowd after a local football game in the village of Al-Asriya near Iskandaria in the Babel Governorate, a mixed Sunni Shiite area. Sadly, 41 people lost their lives and more than 100 people were wounded, including children. It was also reported that the mayor, Ahmed Sheikh, was among those killed in the explosion. As we would find out later, as with many attacks across the globe, the Islamic State group would claim responsibility for the attack. Amanda Rogers, a research fellow at Georgia State University, noted that, quote, "What we see ISIS doing now is an escalation of what we saw al-Zarqawi do, targeting Muslims first and foremost. This is al-Zarqawi 101. End quote. Then in 2004, in the Iraqi city of Fallujah, US generals observed how droves of Saddam Hussein's former militants became loyal to Zarqawi and to ISIS ideologies. This swift change in dynamic meant that the extremists' power had reached worrying levels, and the First Battle of Fallujah would begin after a military response to the brutal killing of 4 US contractors, whose mutilated bodies were hanged from a bridge. 27 American servicemen were killed in the siege, and Fallujah would eventually be the first Iraqi city to be captured and claimed by ISIS. From there, they would facilitate the region to deploy suicide bombers to Baghdad. The phase that followed involved the horrific videos of brutalist propaganda, torture, and beheadings. If the world didn't know who Zarqawi was before, they would soon get to know his name, his face, and his sinister performances on the videos whereby a string of kidnapping occurred, and the murder of his victims were streamed live, and then subsequently posted online by Zarqawi and his devout followers. The first kidnapping was of the American contractor Nicholas Berg in May 2004. Berg was a freelance radio tower repairman who had traveled to Iraq after the United States invasion, but he was soon abducted by the extremist group and then later beheaded. ISIS claimed that the killing was in response to the Abu Ghraib torture and prisoner abuse involving the United States Army and Iraqi prisoners. The CIA would later claim that Berg was murdered by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi himself. The video of the horrific decapitation was released on the internet, reportedly from London to a Malaysian-hosted homepage by the Islamic organization Jama'at al-Tawhid wal Jihad, the shock of which led the group to carry out further kidnappings and beheadings, many of which were carried out by the notorious terrorist cell known colloquially as the Beatles, and in particular the man nicknamed Jihadi John. Mohammed Emwazi, also known as Jihadi John, was a British militant of Kuwaiti origin, seen in several ISIS-produced videos in 2014 and 2015. He was eventually killed in a targeted drone strike in Raqqa, Syria, the de facto capital of ISIS. With the rise of ISIS and al-Zarqawi's name being linked to multiple suicide bombings, kidnappings, murders, and other terrorist activities, the hunt was on for the Jordanian-born leader. Plans to capture, or indeed kill, this radical dictator began immediately after the collapse of Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. Unfortunately, early attempts at securing his apprehension were thwarted due to a variety of issues, this including mismanagement, incompetence, and the mishandling of evidence. Zarqawi's laptop was found, but later mysteriously disappeared. It was reported that he had indeed been captured and then freed again by US troops who failed to recognize him. All the while, he was able to spread his message and continued to direct his operatives in a series of murderous killings. 3 days before his eventual death, Qasim al-Ani, one of the organization's commanders, was arrested in the capital of Iraq. This was a significant moment in the pursuit of al-Zarqawi, who had moved towards Diyala province, north of the capital. The capture and interrogation of al-Ani led to a series of raids on at least 17 properties across central Iraq. This resulted in the apprehension of further Al-Qaeda suspects, and the finding of what US military spokesman described as a treasure trove of both materials and documents pertaining to al-Zarqawi and his associates. In the end, after his sudden rise to power, as well as his reign of violence, murder and terror, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was killed in a targeted attack on June 7, 2006, while attending a meeting in an isolated safe house, approximately 8 kilometers north of Bakuba. It was reported that at 14:15 GMT, 2 United States Air Force F-16C jets had scoured the area and quickly identified the building before dropping 2 500-pound bombs, a laser-guided GBU-12 and GPS-guided GBU-38, onto the residence, killing the terrorist ringleader as well as 5 of his henchmen. Although the earlier mishaps had shed an embarrassing light on the organizations who were in the pursuit of this militant, it was later revealed that the Joint Task Force, Task Force 145, had been tracking him for quite some time. The pursuit of al-Zarqawi is detailed in the book Task Force Black, written by Mark Urban, a British journalist, historian and broadcaster, who is a writer and commentator for the Sunday Times, specializing in defense and foreign affairs. In his book, intelligence was said to have been received from a senior AQI leader, whom the author nicknamed Abu Haider, who had been captured during Operation Larchwood 4. This particular operation was launched in April 2006 by B Squadron of the British 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, supported by US forces, in order to strike an Al-Qaeda-occupied farmhouse in Yusufaya, Baghdad Governorate, Iraq. It was considered a monumental and vital success, and ultimately led to the killing of al-Zarqawi in June of that same year. Operation Larchwood 4 was developed from intelligence gathered in previous raids that were conducted by B Squadron SAS and B Squadron 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. The raids would take place on the 8th and 13th of April 2006, whereby 7 insurgents were eliminated in total, and various pieces of intelligence were gathered and provided to the Joint Special Operations Command, also known as JSOC. The operation was part of a series of tactical procedures conducted in what became known as the Triangle of Death, this name being given to a region of southern Baghdad, known for intense combat, violence and insurgent activity during the 2003 to 2011 US-led occupation, and was carried out by Delta Force and other US forces. The house in which Zarqawi was hiding had been observed for more than 6 weeks prior to his death. With assistance from the Jordanian intelligence agencies, Task Force 145 were able to formally determine that the terrorist was holed up and running his operations from inside this residence. Once the bombs were dropped, the area was quickly secured by Iraqi security forces. Despite widespread reports confirming the bombing of the safe house, many were still skeptical and demanded proof of al-Zarqawi's death due to the previous issues encountered by security officials. This would be released on June 8, 2006, where coalition forces confirmed that the body recovered from the area was that of Zarqawi, using facial recognition, fingerprinting and matching of scars and tattoos. They were finally able to satisfy the critics. One of al-Zarqawi's key lieutenants, spiritual advisor Sheikh Abd al-Rahman, also publicly confirmed his death. United States military sources had initially reported that Zarqawi was killed directly in the attack. However, a statement made the following day by Major General William Caldwell of the US Army concluded he had actually briefly survived the bombing and had been restrained to a stretcher, but then quickly died from his injuries. The 5 other associates were killed immediately in the blast. Caldwell was also required to publicly reject claims that were made by a local Iraqi man who said that he witnessed American soldiers beating Zarqawi to death after the bombing had took place. Despite this local's account of Zarqawi's death not being verified, on June 12, 2006, an autopsy was seemingly performed by the US military and concluded that the cause of death to Zarqawi was a blast injury to the lungs, and that he took nearly an hour to die, though the rumours still continue to this day. In the hours following his death, General George W. Casey Jr., multinational Force Iraq commanding general, made an announcement during a press conference with Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and US Ambassador to Iraq Zalmay Khalilzad on June 8th. He stated, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, coalition forces killed Al-Qaeda terrorist leader Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and one of his key lieutenants, spiritual advisor Sheikh Abd al-Rahman, yesterday, June 7th at 6:15 p.m. in an airstrike against an identified isolated safe house. Tips and intelligence from Iraqi senior leaders from his network led forces to al-Zarqawi and some of his associates who were conducting a meeting approximately 8 kilometers north of Bakuba when the airstrike was launched." Casey would then go on to state that al-Zarqawi and Al-Qaeda in Iraq have conducted terrorist activities against the Iraqi people for years in attempts to undermine the Iraqi national government and coalition efforts to rebuild and stabilize Iraq. He is known to be responsible for the deaths of thousands of Iraqis. Al-Zarqawi's death is a significant blow to Al-Qaeda and another step towards defeating terrorism in Iraq." End quote. On June 30th, 2006, Osama bin Laden released an audio recording in which he stated, quote, "Our Islamic nation was surprised to find its knight, the lion of jihad, the man of determination and will, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, killed in a shameful American raid. We pray to Allah to bless him and accept him among the martyrs as he had hoped for." End quote. Despite their initial disagreements and seeming resentments of one another, bin Laden praised his fallen ally, confirming that he had been advised to continue the onslaught and termination of US-led forces in Iraq, but also, quote, "for those who stood to fight on the side of the Crusaders against the Muslims, then he should kill them whoever they are, regardless of their sect or tribe." End quote. In other words, the hatred, ideology, and thirst for torture, violence, and holy war was still front and center of the terrorists' agenda. Not long after bin Laden heaped his appreciation on Zarqawi, he released another audio tape to declare, quote, "The Mujahideen in the Al-Qaeda organization have chosen the dear brother Abu Hamza al-Muhajir as their leader to succeed the Amir Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. I advise him to focus his fighting on the Americans and everyone who supports them and allies himself with their war on the people of Islam and Iraq." End quote. However, in contrast to the Al-Qaeda's laudation, a US-based strategic analyst site made a claim that the day before al-Zarqawi was killed in the airstrike, it is highly possible that the militant had overstepped his position, thus leading to a distrust within Al-Qaeda. His constant tenacity surrounding hatred for Shia Muslims and ordering of countless killings within the Middle East, not to mention his egotistical personality, led many to question his leadership and ultimately to betray him. A report in the New York Times on June 8th discussed the apparent betrayal and stated that at least one of his fellow Al-Qaeda members, who was regularly seen with Zarqawi, turned his back on his fellow extremist and revealed his whereabouts to the Jordanian intelligence agency, as well as the Americans. The Associated Press also purported that an unnamed Jordanian official confirmed that Zarqawi was found due to assistance from a captured Zarqawi al-Qaeda operative named Zayed Khalaf Raja al-Kabuli. With regards to the Allied forces in the UK and US, when asked if Zarqawi's death would affect things in the Middle East and ease the conflict both internally and across the globe, then Prime Minister Tony Blair stated that, quote, "This isn't going to change with the death of Zarqawi. We should not have any illusions about this." End quote. Unfortunately, Blair was correct, as even to this day, ISIS is still recruiting, formulating sleeper cells and carrying out deadly attacks wherever they see fit. In the 10 years since Zarqawi's death, ISIS has gathered enough support and weapons to seize territory stretching from northern Syria to central Iraq. The group also boasts that it has secured control of specific areas in other regions, as well as possessing and occasionally destroying priceless antiquities, as well as taking young female slaves as a way of recruiting new members. We live in a world where violence, terror, and war is raging everywhere we look. If you just turn on your television or check social media, you can witness the atrocities that are happening all over the world and the death and destruction that it leaves in its wake. However, with the advancement of military technologies, drones, and perhaps even artificial intelligence, the fight against the likes of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, ISIS, and other terrorist groups is becoming more and more positive. On the other hand, there is always the danger that these technologies can be corrupted, hacked, stolen, and used against us by sleeper cells, or indeed through arms dealers, which is a whole other battle and perhaps a subject for another video. In any case, while ISIS may live on, its founder and extremist leader Abu Musab al-Zarqawi is no more, and over time his legacy and his influence will fade.